Firstly, apologise if you can hear some strange heartbeat noises in the back. That's a heartbeat noise for my daughter to help her sleep. She's only 18 weeks and helps her sleep a bit longer. Hopefully that's not too distracting and it's not too off-putting for your ASMR. Let me know if it is. I suspect it probably will be, and I will endeavour not to do any more videos with that in the background. But it is hard to do videos now during her nap time, for various reasons. Anyway, I wanted to go through some of my favourite books. I thought I'd do a show and tell, as these are quicker and easier videos to do. As much as I love doing role plays, it does take a while to set up. And when my daughter naps, I want to make the most of it and get on with some ASMR stuff. So, this book, I love hardback books. There's something really special about them. It feels really meaty somehow. I always think it's a shame that a lot of people are reading books on iPads and things, although actually I have my own. You can't really beat actual print copy of a book. There's something really special about snuggling up with it and a cup of tea or something. So, this book I've actually bought for my father-in-law for Christmas. It's called Burglar Caught by a Skeleton, and Other Singular Tales from the Victorian Press. So it's fiction, it's non-fiction, and it's a series of different straight, weird and wonderful tales, true stories that have been compiled by from newspapers and magazines at the time. So let's have a look inside. So it's the person who wrote it is actually a journalist who's familiar with newspapers, obviously. So that's probably where he got the idea from. It's divided into different sections like love, marriage and family. Inventions. Superstition, beliefs, and the supernatural. Accidental disasters. And obviously each page is done, use this kind of traditional text. It's got like a nice border around, it's quite authentic. And it's also written out in the style of the time, the newspapers of the time. I'll give you an example. Shocking ice accident in Regent's Park. 40 persons drowned. About 3 o'clock on Tuesday, while a large number of persons were skating on the ornamental water in Regent's Park, the whole sheet of ice, several hundred yards long and probably 250 yards across, the first bend in the middle, gave way and broke into myriads of pieces. Scarcely any of the 200 or more on the ice escaped immersion. Some managed to float on large isolated pieces of ice to the shore. Many were struggling in the water for their lives, and all seen struggling had been rescued. It was generally supposed that a number, variously estimated at from 20 to 50, was still in the water. It's quite a nice readable style, and it's one of these books that you can really dip in and out of. You don't need to read it from cover to cover. It's divided into nice sections, so Singular Trial at Madrid. And it quotes, of course, from the Northern Star and National Trade Journals, 1845. A thief detected by a parrot. That kind of thing. Extraordinary scene in a police court. A dangerous witch, my favourite. So I'm going to get a copy for myself. It's my favourite. It looks amazing. And as I said, being hardback, it just makes it, I don't know, there's something about hardbacks that just makes it really add something a bit more special to it. And the front page is done as it would have done at the time, so it's quite authentic. Beautiful book. And that's called The Burglar Caught by a Skeleton. This book, this is an old favourite of mine. As a child, I was absolutely fascinated and obsessed with bats. This book is written in the 1980s, another hardback, and it's by someone called Phil Richardson. Not particularly famous or well known, apart from in the bat world, the ecological world. But as a child, I was a bit of a geek. Well, still am, but who cares, hey? When my mum bought me the book, it was actually at a signing. There's a signature there, so this has been really special for me. And I used to write notes in it when I was little. I used to fancy myself a bit of a bat expert. Strange child, but there you go. And it's kind of, again, it's divided up into sections, so it's written in 1985, 1 year after I was born. Gives you facts about it, of course, talk about bat detectors. A lot of this quite dated, of course. But the pictures, I just love the pictures. I thought they were fantastic. Gorgeous woodcuts, and I love that style. In fact, a previous ASMR video I did kind of in a woodcut style, and I think that's probably where I got my inspiration from. Some cute little cartoons, the town bat, and it's actually really readable. It's not one of those really, it's not one of those heavy textbooks. So I had this when I was, although it was written when I was 1 year old. Mum got this for me when I was about 5 or 6. So, and I've had it ever since. So, special book for me. That's bats. This one, called Tales of Witches and Sorcery, and of course it's the hardback book. And this is basically chilling accounts of witchery from the Middle Ages to modern times. Did I just say witchery? Oh, how embarrassing. Witchery. I should practice that a bit. Anyway, I absolutely adore this book. It's basically a collection of stories, some of them supposedly true, although they obviously aren't, but accounts of the time during the witch trials and the witch hunts in all over the world. And there's poems, and these stories are all authentic, so they were collected from primary sources at the times, in newspapers, handed down from generations, and of course there's some stories as well. I've had this book for 20 years, so the pages are lovely and brown, so they're kind of all old and used. Written in 1989 actually, I hadn't quite realised, but there's some lovely stories, really magical ones. Which is a Pendle Forest, which a fascinating story, which I will do an ASMR video on some point. Pendle is in Lancashire in northern England. Incredible story, true, absolutely true. So I will kind of explain about that a bit later on in another video. And these are just again a collection of stories, and it's got authentic woodcuts at the time, kind of the style. This was actually done, this was by someone called Ulus Magnus, Rome, 1555. And it's got kind of, here it says, prickers used by witch hunters to find the devil's mark on the skin, which Satan was supposed to brand his followers, which was insensible to pain. There's another ASMR video, I think, talking about the witch hunt trials and the history for anyone who's interested. Or it might just be me and my morbid fascination, but that was how they used to try and detect witches, was to, they believed that if you were possessed by the devil or kind of had sold your soul, you wouldn't feel any pain. And the idea was they'd prick them. But they sometimes would do it with blunt instruments, so you wouldn't feel pain and therefore you'd be a witch. So these were the prickers they used. and also to help find the devil's mark. So if you had a mole or a bruise, that was obviously the devil's mark that an imp had been suckling from you. But these particular instruments were sharp, so obviously they'd create their own mark, and therefore you were a witch. So not very fair, of course. So it gives you a little bit of information about what happened, as well as the actual stories of the time. And again, this is something that's really nice to dip into. So, I love this book. It's called Tales of Witches and Sorcery. Ooh, my hot chocolate's getting cold. I'm just going to have a bit of a drink. Sorry, that was probably vile. I've been told off for slurping my drinks, but it's only because I can never wait for them to get cold. I always drink them when they're hot, so I slurp. Not very civilised, really. This amazing book is by a crazy, eccentric guy, I think from California, called Dennis Severs. Again, and this isn't hardback, but it kind of makes up for it by what it's about, called 18 Folgate Street. So Dennis Severs had an absolute fascination with the 18th century in England, and moved over to England as a teenager and bought a derelict 18th century house in Spitalfields, which at the time was basically derelict kind of area. It used to be really prosperous in the 18th century because of the silk trade and the silk markets and things, silk weavers. And he was so fascinated with the 18th century, he wanted to restore the house as it would have been at the time. But even more than that, he actually restored it as it would have been, but under the floorboards he put speakers and created sound effects of horse and carts, people talking. The idea was that any visitors to the house, it would feel like they were back in the 18th century. So all the sounds were as unique as possible. So chiming of clocks, as I said, horse and carts, crackling fire. It must have been incredible. So this book is an account of how he did it, how he set up this house, and today it's a museum. He's sadly passed away a few years ago, but he wrote this book before he died. And some of the pictures, it's incredible. As I do more videos, you'll probably realise some of my crazy obsessions, and one of them is 18th century. And this book, it smells amazing. So these are some of the pictures of his house. He wanted to create a sense that when you come into a room, it's as if you have just missed the ghosts of the past, as if they're in the next room. So he wanted to create things as if they had just left. So there'd be half-eaten cake, there'd be an unopened letter. This is one of my favourite pictures. You probably can't see it in all its glory. It's divine. It kind of talks about his perspective, he basically created these characters called Isaac Gervais. And he basically talks about how he sees time travel and history. When you visit the house today, everything's done by candlelight, and you're meant to go in silence to really get your sense. It's not like a normal museum where there's kids screaming and buttons to press. Okay, just to pick up from where I left off, I was talking about some of my favourite books, and explaining why I liked them, and just giving you a synopsis of some of them, explanation. The next book, which is one of my favourites, is a non-fiction, of course, by Alison Weir, who's a historian who's written biographies of Elizabeth I, of Mary I, of each of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And this latest book is about a particular period in Anne Boleyn's life, called The Lady in the Tower. And what I really love about this particular book is it focuses on just her downfall rather than the entire biography of her life. I've got so many biographies of Anne Boleyn's life, and she's one of my favourite women in history, and I'm fascinated with her. But this was an unusual focus. So it focuses on just a few months from May 1336, from January 1336, through to her death a few months later in May 1336. Again, it's a hardback book. I'll just share some of the pages. This is a portrait, a rare portrait that not many people would have seen of Anne Boleyn. And this is what she was probably looked like at the time of her fall. And although she was very young, there's always been a lot of discrepancy and disagreements about the date of her birth. Some say 1501, some say 1507. But by all accounts, she would have been in her 30s, early to mid 30s. But because of all the various things that were going on, she's portrayed here as quite gaunt and quite ill. I'm sure I'll do a specific ASMR video about Anne Boleyn and about the Henry VIII's 6 wives, but that's not what this video is about today. Some portraits, as I'm sure everyone recognises this, of Henry VIII. It's a really detailed, again, very readable book. This one was actually painted in the 18th, 19th century, and it's a romantic artist interpretation of Anne's downfall, at the point at which she had to say goodbye to her daughter before she was taken to the Tower of London, which she would never return. So this wasn't contemporary, this was painted 300 years later, and it was someone has imagined it would look like. This I want to show you as a fiction book. Put this in it. This is by an incredible author called Carlo Tassini, who wrote The Kite Runner, which I believe has been made into a film. This book's called 1,000 Splendid Suns, and it's about Afghanistan, and it focuses on the plight of women during the time and how they were treated under the Taliban occupation. It's an absolutely incredible book. I read it when it was first out in 2007, before it was published. I was a trainee journalist at the time and working, had a work placement in a psychologist magazine, and the publisher had sent the manuscript for us to review, so I did a little review. And it was one of the few books that's actually made me cry. It's an incredibly sad book. very powerful. I'll read the back. Mariam is only 15 when she is sent to Kabul to marry the troubled and bitter Rashid, who is 30 years her senior. Nearly 2 decades later, in a climate of growing unrest, tragedy strikes 15-year-old Layla, who must leave her home and join Mariam's unhappy household. Layla and Mariam are to find consolation in each other, their friendship to grow as deep as the bond between sisters, as strong as the ties between mother and daughter. With the passing of time comes Taliban rule over Afghanistan, the streets of Kabul loud with the sound of gunfire and bombs. Life is a desperate struggle against starvation, brutality and fear, the women's endurance tested beyond their worst imaginings. Yet love can move a person to act in unexpected ways, lead them to overcome the most daunting obstacles with a startling heroism. In the end, it is love that triumphs over death and destruction. 1,000 Splendid Suns is an unforgettable portrait of a wounded country and a deeply moving story of family and friendship. It is a beautiful, heart-wrenching story of an unforgiving time, an unlikely bond, and an indestructible love. So yeah. That is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini. And the last book I want to talk to you about is autobiography, My Bookie Work by Russell Brand. This is a comedy, or it's autobiography, by the comedian, one of my favourite comedians in fact, who's a bit of a narcissist, I'd say, but he's one of these very intelligent people who has got a lot to say and says it in really comical, satirical ways. I think people just listen to his accent and the fact that he did used to be a heroin addict and he has a little bit obsessed with sex and just assume he's just got a one-track mind, but actually he's very politically motivated. He's got a lot of liberal views. I won't get too much into that because I don't want to get into political debate, but a lot of his views are very forward-thinking. And actually has done a lot of good. Set up a charity helping people who are down on their luck, helping heroin addicts and alcoholics set on the right road to recovery. So he's written 2 autobiographies. This is part 1. Very funny. So it talks about his early life at school. It talks about his growing addiction, his first introduction with fame, and his relapses within that, and then finally his recovery from heroin addiction. So I think it's quite uplifting. It's a very funny, of course, uplifting book for anyone who knows anyone struggling with this, that it is possible to recover. So that's Russell Brand. I have got millions of other books I'd love to talk about, but I wanted to focus mainly on the hardback books because, as I said before, they are lovely to read and they are easy to talk about because of the way they're held, and they feel nice, of course. I mean, the next lot of ASMR videos I want to do, I'm going to focus on the history side and talk about some of my interests in history, so focusing on the Tudors, which is 16th century, as well as the 18th century as well. As well as I might do an ASMR video on the witchcraft trials of the 16th, 17th centuries, which are fascinating stories in themselves. Hopefully it won't be too long before I can do another one. So, watch this space.